Hi.
Hello, my name is Natalie Zacharias from Tending Your Spirit. I'd like to welcome you to episode 10 of the Cosmic Earth Conversations. I'm here with my dear friend Xavier Búo, and I'm so excited to introduce him to you. And before we start the conversation, Xavier, if you could introduce yourself, I would greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Hi, Natalie.
Hey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Xavier Búo. A little bit about me. I met my dear friend Natalie when I was in San Francisco and the community there, beautiful community up there. And I was working up there, finishing up my work as a psychotherapist, doing some work with political asylum refugees. I had a lot of my own personal work that I was doing with plant medicine there. um, it really was an activation, I would say, an introduction into a community of not just getting acquainted more with the spirit of plants and medicines, and more so about the gatekeepers, the people that really are holding the frequency to work with these beings that are really working with plants. And I found it very important to have community around that for me, since there wasn't a school at that point. There wasn't a facility where I can go do training at that point. And so for me, it was really beautiful to have landed with such a uh, integrity filled community of people. It really lit up quite a bit as far as what where I needed to be, how leveling myself up as well. And so I had to really rise up to that occasion. I didn't have to. At that point, I really wanted to. I found it imperative. Um, and so now I'm working with psychedelics. I'm really moving into that space as a psychotherapist. A lot of my work has really been in hospitals and working with really clinical tools like CBT, narrative therapy, motivational interviewing, just different aspects and for different organizations. And in my own personal healing, because a lot of the work I was doing was very intense trauma, I was noticing that I was having my own secondary trauma. I didn't know at the time that that's what it was. I actually at times would have to leave the United States because I felt I'm very sensitive. I can pick up on energy, um, meaning that I can step into a room and I could feel okay before stepping into that room, and immediately I sense something coming from like the northwest corner, and I'm not sure why. And as I've developed my energy and working with plant medicines, I'm understanding myself and how to navigate my own frequency and the frequencies outside of me that influence my own personal energetic signature. And so plant medicines have really taught me. It's been a great teacher for me. And being very respectful at the same time and not going into a realm of overusing them, because I have noticed some of my other friends and colleagues that go into that and tend to almost not come back and integrate the work that I've found has been as actually the medicine, the real medicine even.
Yeah.
Um, I don't want to really disparage it at all, and that's not what my intention is. It's for me personally has been more of having this really wonderful balance
Yeah.
and working with it. So that's where I'm at now. I'm actually about to start doing it formally at a clinic now that things are becoming more legal. So I'm coming out of the underground space and working with it a little bit more
In
legitimate.
the light.
Yeah, and here I don't have to go to Latin America anymore to go and like
Yeah.
facilitate,
Yeah.
which is really important and very very timely, I would
Yeah.
say, very
Yeah.
timely. So that's where I'm at. That's my work has been around, and I'm looking forward to sharing more.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I know before we started recording, you and I were talking a lot about, you know, something that happens as a result of, I feel it's like the Western way of being, coming in contact with these like really ancient um, ceremonies and ways of being. And, you know, you look at like consumerism and like how in the Western world that we're consumers, we consume. That's like what we've
Right.
been programmed to do.
Correct.
And, you know, one of the like the shadow of that is that we consume. And before I was telling you about my friend who's a diviner, one time the Contemple, which are the beings that she works with, and her name's Liv Mokai-Wheeler, and the Contemple, they were talking about like consume her, like the word consumer, how it's consume her. And
Yeah.
it's really like,
Yeah.
yeah, like,
Yeah. Take over.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what we do. And as a result of that, there's like people have addiction, and what you were just speaking to of like addiction to plant medicines, people who are um like they become addicted to those um elevated states of consciousness and don't give themselves the time to like also be the physical beings that they are,
Yes. I love
who
that.
agreed to come as humans into this form onto this earth to help all of the beings on earth elevate and evolve and um, continue to grow. And so yeah, I would love to hear more about
Yeah,
your
I love
your
that. I love two
experience and
topics, it
thoughts.
sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's two different topics here, and both of them I hope I get a chance to really add to that conversation. And both of those I see right now is one is the consumerism around psychedelics
Yeah.
and that old conditioning and the old programming of these ways of wanting to have that
Hmm.
medicine and never turn it off because it's just
Yeah.
our culture in North America has been so filled with trauma. There's
Yeah.
trauma in the environment consistently, and the way we
Yeah.
relate to each other. Maybe not every
Yeah.
single being, but for most people, there isn't a skill set that is taught in schools, in primary
Yeah.
schools, where you
Yeah.
say, hey, here are some skills, so that way you know how to operate in our society, so
Yeah.
therefore you're not spreading your own trauma, and you're working on your own trauma, and you're supporting those that actually have trauma. So it's almost like a trauma informed society that we might even
Yeah.
have.
That's what we're gonna
We
have to
don't
evolve
have
into.
that. It's quite the opposite, actually.
Yeah.
It's
So
quite the
true.
opposite, where we're not aware, not some of us aren't aware, unfortunately, of this behavior I'm doing is actually impacting this person in this way. And
Mhm.
so psychedelics really allows us to really temporarily suspend that life and go to a
Yeah.
different life where all is connected, where all is healed, where all is love. And that frequency is so beautiful. And I can
Yeah.
see that being addicting, and,
Yeah.
and when I say addiction, I'm not really looking at it as like it's a chemically addicting substance, because it's
Yeah.
actually not.
It's
It's
not.
not. It's not the actual substance itself that's addicting. When I work with addictions, I'm looking more at the behaviors that
Hmm.
actually are addicting. And so for me, it's the behavior of wanting to disassociate, the behavior
Yeah.
of really wanting to check out and really
Yeah.
not come back and bring that medicine and bring that
Yeah.
wisdom incarnate into the vessel that the spirit is inhabiting.
Yeah.
And so that's really the power there, is the being able to go to that place, to that
Yeah.
different frequency, that different dimension, wherever they are,
Yeah.
and bringing back the tools, the wisdom, and
Yeah.
utilizing them here in this lifetime. And that, I would say, is much more powerful for a few different reasons. For one, it really honors that relationship with that plant medicine, and it
Yeah.
allows them to really understand that this is my purpose. It's not to take you away from here,
Hmm.
permanently, but temporarily transport you to this other place to
Hmm.
bring that wisdom here now for yourself, for those that you touch, and specifically family members, community members, because as beacons of light, we really do change the frequency of the planet and those around us with
Yeah.
how we're operating. And so,
Yeah.
if, like, for example, Natalie, I would say, if having met you, I saw that I needed to level up, that it was important for me to do that by looking at your frequency and saying, okay, I am some of those ways. I
Yeah.
am lacking in some of those ways in this way that I'm seeing her operate. And so
Yeah.
for me, it's like, okay, that's great observation. And not from a place of, I'm not loving myself, or I'm judging myself, or just,
Yeah. That's important.
it's more of a, as
Yeah.
a place of like an awareness of saying, like,
Yeah.
oh, that there's another way I can, increase my frequency, that I can improve maybe how I do this thing that I do. It might not be damaging, and that's okay, but it can also be improved, and that's also wonderful. I mean, the evolution of the self is really just that. It's, even having that awareness within the self. And anytime I do plant medicine, I come back thinking, okay, I'm good. I'm going to be this like great example and this healer, and and sure, with my ability to have that level of awareness. And it's something I integrate, and as time goes on, I come to realize I've got a lot more work to do. It doesn't end. It really doesn't end. And so going back to psychedelics and its power, I think it's important to honor what they're here to do and how to utilize them. Everyone's welcome to their journey. Maybe somebody needs to actually do that, and that's how they learn the lesson of like, okay, my relationship with them is this. Is my relationship with anything else in my life like this? Do I operate that way? And having a look at that to see if that's a really great way to work with how one is operating in the world.
Yeah. It's beautiful, because what you're sharing about like having that reflection of like being in contact with someone, you're like, oh, something in that contact allows you to be like, oh, this is how I want to rise up to the occasion. That's something that I feel like in what I've experienced in my own healing around, developing a relationship with plant medicines, and also just doing like, I mean, there's so many different ways to do this. I don't think people need to do plant medicines to be able to access this. There's just one of the many like tools that are accessible for us to
Agreed.
to feel called to. Like, I mean, just to give, before I go down this road of what I'm going to say, like just to give context, like I didn't know what plant medicines were the first time I ever sat in a ceremony. In fact, I had never, ever had experience with psychedelic medicines before I sat down with ayahuasca. And I remember like everyone that I knew, they're like, really? They're like, you never? And I was like, no. And I was like, and I was very clear, like, I don't want to hear anyone telling me what's going to happen, or people who've never sat with the medicine wanted to tell me like what I'm going to experience. I was like, no, I want to go in blind and just have the experience without having everyone projections, basically, and it wasn't something that I felt like I'm one of those people who are like, screw peer pressure, like no, like that doesn't work for me. Like I feel called to do things because I feel called to do things, and it's a very like gut instinct of like yes, and I'm a very clear like discerning thing of yes or no, and I feel that's important, because when it comes down to it, like I can't blame anyone else for any choices that I made, because I'm the one who made the choices, and so take ownership for that. And so I say that because I also want to say, like, not everyone needs to do plant medicines. I actually really believe that the plants will call to you and you'll feel like yes or no, and I think there's something to that to be respected.
I agree with you so much, and I love that you said that. I really do. Because I tend to turn them down off. The more powerful plants for me are definitely Aya, and I don't always. It comes to me, and I say thank you. I'm not, I'm not ready to connect. And and
I've said no more times than I said yes. Like I will say that. And I feel like it's very important.
It's very important to be discerning of like, okay, that's great. You're knocking on my door. I don't have to answer it every time. That might not be the tool I need in that moment. I have other tools at my disposal. I know maybe others might not, and I can respect it if it's knocking and you always have to answer it because it's the only tool. I would say like, let's introduce other tools as well. And the reason for that as well is because like any relationship, we're going to really want to understand if we're still, if we're still receiving the same wisdom, if it's the same wisdom over and over, and we're just kind of on a repeat, on a loop of maybe just learning the same thing again over and over and over. And one thing that I'm noticing when I work a lot with empaths, people like myself, very highly sensitive to energies, and plant medicines, I'm noticing might actually sometimes reduce their frequency at times. It's not something that's ever really spoken about. And I love plant medicine, so I'm not going to be bashing them. That's not at all what I'm saying. I think it's important to be discerning, though, of they might not always, elevate you
Yeah.
because you might already be more elevated than the frequency of that plant without
Yeah.
realizing it. And it actually might bring you down to a more grounded place. And maybe that might be useful.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not really clear completely as to why that happens, but I've noticed it for me. I've noticed it for other highly sensitive beings that I've worked with, where plant medicine isn't always the answer. And so
Yeah.
it's got me into a curious state of really learning how it's working, for
Yeah.
people. So I'm
Well,
very
that's
open to
interesting
knowing
because
more.
I'm gonna say what I was gonna say before, and then I'm gonna answer this too because there's something that comes up with that. So before I was saying is like what I've learned in my own personal healing journey with working with plant medicines and energy work and therapy and all these different modalities that I like call on as my tools is that when you were speaking before of like elevating yourself and like it not being like I am lesser than or like it's not
Right,
like a power
exactly.
thing.
Right,
I feel like is like more of remembering who you are.
right,
Like that is actually what we're doing. We're literally like deprogramming and releasing and like
correct.
layers that aren't
Right.
who we
That
are. Like
perfect child that came into the earth. Yeah,
exactly, like that
yeah,
spirit, that like
yeah,
frequency. You know, people call it
yeah.
the higher self. Like
Yes,
in connecting with the higher self and like
the
bringing
divine
it down.
child.
Like, yeah, like being very grounded and like bringing
Yeah,
your higher self into this like avatar that you're currently
correct.
like in
Yes.
and integrating that and healing ancestral trauma and healing
Yeah.
past life trauma and all that stuff. It's a lot in there. So that's what I wanted to finish saying from before, and then also what you were speaking to right now about how sometimes working with plant medicines can actually lower your frequency. I mean, there's something to be talked about entities. Like people
Oh,
don't talk about that so much, and actually a
please
lot of
let's
people
talk
I've
about
seen,
that.
like people are very um and I understand why this happens too, because of that the way so many people have been programmed, like, oh, demons, angels, like in a very
Right.
Judeo-Christian like a
Correct.
way of seeing the world.
Yes. Yeah.
And like entities are low frequency energies. And when you're in um like I experience, grandmother ayahuasca to be very much of like a in some way she's a translator. She helps you translate. If you're doing a dieta, when you're like she helps translate the language of the plant that you're doing the dieta with.
Hmm.
And so in some way she's like an ambassador to the plant
Hmm.
world is
Yes.
what my experience is with her. I
Yeah.
mean, because you can really think of like people focus so much on the master plants, but when you really think of like literally all the plants that you're in relationship, like what you're eating,
Hmm.
rosemary happens to be a plant that I've like developed over the years a very strong
Hmm.
relationship. Yes, it's not a psychedelic plant, but like rosemary is a very strong spirit that has a lot of properties that
I mean,
people take for
essences,
granted. Yeah,
oils, those are
yeah,
beings that assist
yeah,
us for sure.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so something that happens in ceremonies, I mean, you have to take into consideration of like how were the plants harvested first
Hmm.
off. What was the energy that was going into the harvest of them?
Just like
What
cooking.
was the energy that was going into the creation,
Mhm.
since we're talking about ayahuasca, the creation of the brew? Who
Right.
was in ceremony in creating the medicine?
Mhm.
What lands were they doing this in? What is their relationship to the lands that the medicine was being brewed in?
Right.
What's the trauma? Because I mean, the earth has the trauma of all the experiences that have happened. You
Yes.
know, she remembers. She's been present for all of it,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
and so that's all part of it. Um, then you have the people that are in ceremony and creating it. Then you have, how that medicine, like whatever physical travel, geographical travel that it has
Hmm.
to go to arrive.
Hmm.
And then you have the constellation of people who are in the ceremony. Then
Hmm.
you have the person who's holding the container for the ceremony and their lineage, who they walk with, their, all that stuff. There's a lot of, um, what's that word? There's a lot of things in place that are like,
There's a
that
lot of
are,
influences, the
yeah,
energy
there's a
just kind of
lot.
comes in. Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you're bringing in a really solid point here. And that's not that we're not being always mindful in our Western culture of consumerism and the
yeah,
corporatization of
yeah,
psychedelics as it comes in.
yeah,
One of my concerns has been is how are we going to do this responsibly?
Yeah.
Because, whenever there's like a hot new market, like the cannabis market's a really great example,
Hmm.
hot new market, there's a lot of resistance because of
Hmm.
old stigmas, old ideas, old, war on drugs.
Yeah.
And so as soon as that became legal, no
Hmm.
longer is it just legal, it's an essential need, like
Yeah.
California, there are only essential needs. All of a sudden we went from like a year ago to being like it's illegal to, oh, now it's an essential need,
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
so it's important to really look at also the consumerism of that,
Yeah.
and how our culture still operating and doing the same things, and what can
Yeah.
we do to really have more awareness around that,
Yeah.
and I mean, maybe somebody doesn't have the power to, change that one organization, but the power for oneself to look at how am I, for me personally,
Yeah.
how do I counter that? Do I
Yeah.
bless the medicine? Am I more mindful of where it's coming from, of its practices,
Mhm.
and whatnot? So that's important to
Yeah.
also have as a topic to really discover and
Yeah.
explore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with anything, like people utilizing their discernment more and more, being more very conscious of reading the discernment of, you know, who you're working with, who's holding space for you,
Right.
you know, sensing into like, do I have permission to do this?
Right.
So many the last ceremony I sat in, like I got a very clear message from the medicine of like, okay, I have allowed you to do this here on these lands. This is not the lands that I am originally from. This land has its own medicine. You want to sit with me next time? Come meet me in the jungle.
Yeah.
And then like had a very clear vision of like why in the jungle and how the
Yes.
animals and the plants and
Oh,
the
everything.
the
The
ancestors of the
spirit is
land, like
very
all
potent
of
there.
it.
Yes.
Yeah, like, all of it, how it worked. I was like,
Correct.
cool, respect. Like, thank
Yeah.
you for finding me because it felt very much that she found me
Yeah.
and where I was at and helped me remember a lot.
Yeah.
And also, like, yes, respect. Like, this land does have its own medicine that deserves its respect. Because I mean, you're talking about North America, just in the United States. Like, how disrespected have the indigenous people have been? And disrespected doesn't even fully cover. Like, that's just
Yeah.
like
That's
the
lightly.
best word I can think of.
I can relate. I can understand. Yeah.
No, like, there's some uh and like I don't mean it to come from a place of like shame at all. It's just
No.
like this is awareness, this is where we're at, and also like what can we do to change that, you
Yeah.
know? Um yeah. And I want to talk about entities because I noticed that I mentioned it, but we didn't go into it. And I feel like we do need to talk about it because it's
Let's do
like
it. Yeah,
I
that's
have like
important. You're opening a portal every time you work with medicine. You're
yeah,
opening an energetic portal, linked through the astral body.
yeah,
And there can be attachments when you come back.
yeah, yeah.
If you're not working with a shaman or a guide or
Mhm.
a medicine person that can really do the work to ensure that your travels to that other place are, one where you come back, complete and not
Yeah,
fragmented, and
yeah,
that's important to talk about. So I'm
yeah,
open to it. I'm definitely open to
yeah.
it.
It something that like like entities or low frequency energies, they can be as I almost want to say like not as harmless, but they do cause harm in some way because we were talking
They
about frequency,
do. They
but they can
can.
be as little as like
Yeah.
sludge if you think of it that way.
Yeah.
uh, that's still sludge, and sludge buildup causes buildup,
Hmm.
or they can be like very nasty, like snarly
Yeah.
energies.
Yeah.
Like if you have sight, then you can actually see them, and it's
Hmm.
they're
I'll share
the
something about that later, but yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
like,
Yes. The one I saw most recently.
like I can go really deep with this, and I was sharing it before we started the recording. I was sharing with you the experience that I had in the house that I lived in, where I was in a very like it was conflict, and we were heated, and there was anger and all these things. Talking to a housemate of mine who had been at the time microdosing a concoction of different, and I've like kind of mentioned it in the last episodes that I did about this experience. But what happened is that I was angry about the way that um there was not a container, there was not respect for the spirits of the plants that were being ingested every day. And as a result, there was literally entities walking around in the house. Like you would see these like in the corner eye, you know, you would catch these like tall ass things that I didn't know what they were. And people were having experiences, and there was like fogging. It was just like all these different things that were happening. And him and I were in this conversation and like fighting, and literally a demonic face like appeared in front of his face, and it scared the crap out of me because I was not ingesting anything like in
Mm-hmm.
normal form,
Right,
having this
right.
very heated conversation, and then seeing this very terrifying thing pop out of this person's face, and was like, whoa, that's an entity. Like was very clear of like,
Yeah,
no, like this is
yeah,
not allowed here.
yeah.
um, and you know, those lower density energies, they can't exist where love exists. So like for us to like, I realized in that moment, to be able to transmute and transform what was happening, I needed to, even though it was terrifying and my like nervous system was like, this is danger, I was like, I have to be vulnerable and drop into my heart and
Mm-hmm.
be in love.
Mm-hmm.
And then that cleared, you know, the energy there, and
Yeah.
we're actually able to connect and stuff like that. And I feel, you know, as like woo woo as that can sound, of like love being the answer, but like love is a frequency,
It's a
and
frequency. Oh yeah.
and it's a very high one.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And you know, those type of low frequency energies don't like that. They don't like where love
No,
exists,
no.
because it doesn't feed them.
No, you're
And
right.
so
That's
yeah,
exactly it.
I feel
And I
like
think that's an important topic or addition to that is they're looking for their source. They're looking for their
mhm,
food source.
yeah,
And we might want to talk about that. What is that food source? You know, and
yeah,
oftentimes it's found in heated debates between people. The energy
yeah,
of that is so low frequency that
yeah,
they require that energy to be alive, to
mhm,
have a place in that reality. And
mhm,
so, you know, when we're working with plant medicines and we're reliving a trauma, you know,
mhm.
that's an opportune time for that door to be open, for that portal to
Oh,
be
yeah,
open for a lower entity to come in and
oh,
be
yeah,
like, okay, you're working with that trauma. If we're not having protection around that time, I'm just going to
yeah,
kind of come in and you know bring up my other friends along in a sense.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so this isn't something to really scare people
No,
because that's not the intention. The intention is awareness here. The
yeah,
intention is awareness and knowing that that exists. And you know, celestial, really high frequency beings of the light also exist. You know,
yeah,
both of them. So
yeah,
it really is important to do the work, to
yeah,
become aware, to if you are doing these plant medicines, to really have the proper preparations in a
yeah,
sense, you know,
yeah,
the ethics, I would even say, the respect or the
yeah,
ceremony, you know, is
yeah,
really about the intentionality, you know,
yeah,
and you're setting you're setting the set, you're setting the setting in a sense,
yeah,
you're creating that, and
yeah,
so it allows for this really strong container to be held for that.
yeah.
And I'll share really quickly an experience of an entity that was in my stomach, and I didn't know that. A friend of mine had picked up on it, and I kind of was like, okay, yeah, you know, I did a lot of cord cutting, I did a lot of cleansing and clearing, and I wasn't really sure, you know, what my a lot of my I hang out with people who are very intuitive as well, and who could
Mhm.
see spirits and are mediums pretty much.
Yeah,
And I thought I had cleared it. You know, I was having some low energy myself, and I wasn't doing a good job of cleaning it. I did because I didn't know that I was so in my commercialization and my consumerism of like
mhm.
I was so focused on like, and this is me not doing plant medicine. This is me just operating in my
Oh yeah,
day-to-day ordinary awareness life, right?
yeah,
And I filled my day so much where I wasn't blessing my food.
mhm,
My meditation took a back seat. My prayers went down. So like my ceremonial way, my sacred way of life was really, you know, it took a back seat because this is
yeah,
at the point where I was leaving the hospital system and starting my own private practice. So for me, I was working both jobs. And so I was
yeah,
like, go time, you know, and I know a lot of
yeah,
people operate that way, especially entrepreneurs where you're working so much. And so a lot of my
yeah,
spiritual life took a back seat. It wasn't until I went to do a ceremony where I realized that I was allowing somebody who I was living with to cook my meals. And this person was somebody who, you know, they operate normally in a very anxious state, very
Yeah.
fearful, constantly low energy. And,
Yeah.
you know, I was often the person that would support that person and not being in that place.
Yeah.
And they were cooking my meals and I wasn't blessing them. And then I
Mm.
had a mentor of mine, a guide, mentioned, hey, something's going on with the food you're eating. You might want to look into that.
Mm.
And they didn't tell me exactly what was going on. All they said was like, you know what? I'm not going to tell you. I think it's important for you to learn on your own. And if
Mm.
you don't get it, let me give you a clue. Go watch the movie Like Water for Chocolate. And I was like,
Oh yeah.
okay. I'm like, I'd heard about it and I think I saw it, but I was like, okay. I went to see it and I was like, oh my goodness, the person
Forgot
cooking the meal,
forever.
like their energy like was in that food, and they were
Yeah.
eating that food and they got sick. And
Yeah.
so what happened when I went to the Amazon is like I immediately stopped that from happening, that behavior. And
Mm.
yet the energy was still in my stomach. And so what happened when I did the ceremony, I usually don't throw up. I don't purge in that way from my
Oh,
mouth.
that's nice.
Yeah, I don't usually. So this time I did. And what happened
Uh-huh.
was I was purging in a bucket and
Mm.
I was purging. And next thing you know, I see this black, smoky spirit like come
Mm.
in and it looks at me right in the face. And it's my roommate's face. And it
Oh
goes
my
off into the Amazon really, really fast. And I'm like, whoa, obviously I'm under the influence of medicine and I didn't see
Right.
that, in my ordinary state of awareness. And
Yeah.
yet that's why we do plant medicine, to have a different perspective, to
Yeah.
understand, hey, what's limiting me? What is it that what's my path? What are the obstacles in this path? And for
Yeah.
me, it was back to boundaries, back
Yeah.
to like, it's important to have boundaries. It's important to also have boundaries with my work and
Yeah.
not allowing my spiritual life to take a back seat.
Yeah.
My prayers, my meditation, all of my practices that I have, my ability to have a mindful way of living.
Yeah.
So that was a huge healing lesson for me, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too because we you don't, honestly, you don't have to be with plant medicine to be able to have this awareness about entities.
No.
I've like come to very, you know, it feels very clear. Like I can scan my energy field like right here as we are and see like, oh, okay, there's something that's drawing my attention here. There's something that's drawing my attention here. Okay, let me access the tools that I have. And sometimes like, I mean, I have a lot of tools and I still seek support for healing because there's like, we all have blind spots. And I
Yes.
think that's actually a really good thing that we need to like be able to work together to
Yes.
help each other. I feel very firmly that we are our best healer. And
Yes.
also part of that is knowing like I need help. I need some support because this is to think of it like out of my expertise, like my level of expertise. I need someone else's
Yeah.
lens to look into this. And I feel like you and I can continue talking. I know we have about 15 minutes left. So one thing I want to touch in on that we discussed beforehand is that um, how we attach to that feeling of escaping. And
Yeah.
before we were talking about addiction, and you were talking about dissociation, and I feel like this is just like a really important thing to tie into of like how entities can play a role in that.
Mm.
And people like, I mean, I know it's like it can be a very hard concept to have, but like sometimes people have like ancestral attachments and entities, and like, and even ancestors who haven't transitioned.
Yes.
Like I've had to do ceremonies of like helping particular ancestors transition who didn't really live, like they weren't angels. They were here. They've been
Good to know
causing
that,
havoc
right?
on the yeah, like you know they did some shit. And we're causing havoc on their living descendants. And because of being in ceremony, having that awareness of like, oh, I see it, so it's my responsibility. Oh, I chose that it's my responsibility to do something about it. But sometimes, what we think are like what show up as entities can also be untransitioned ancestors who are stuck and need support in in going into the ancestral realm.
I love
Um,
that.
yeah, so
Yeah.
whatever you want to take from there.
Yeah, no,
I'd love to. Yeah.
it's important to do that work as well, to know that, yeah, the ancestors have a voice and they have an influence as well. And some of it is clearing some of their karma, some of their dharma that they've brought onto the lineage, so to
Mhm,
speak.
mhm,
And, I'm finding specifically with this year that there is a lot of lineage breakers, that there are,
mhm.
right now, many
Sure.
people, many lineage breaking. And what I mean by that is, there are very aware beings that are really coming into these families,
Mhm.
and being that beacon of light to support the balancing of energies, to be able to have
Yeah,
healing, in
yeah,
that, in these little mini tribes, as I call them,
yeah,
like every family is a little mini tribe,
absolutely.
and we, we all connect to that more global tribe, from that point.
Yeah.
And the escapism around that might be, um, people break from their families and they think that the trauma is done, but it's not really
Yeah.
over. It's not really over.
Uh-huh.
That work is still there, and you play
Yeah,
those psychodramas with your friends, with your lovers, with
yeah.
your colleagues, like with the world at large. And
Mhm.
so being able to do that work to support the lineage, and everyone has a different lineage. And even like if you and I were from the exact same lineage, there would still be different layers of
Oh,
trauma that we would,
totally.
encounter. So
Yeah.
yeah, and adding to that escapism, that I see that often within myself as well, where I tend to want to just run away. It's just so easy
Mhm,
to just not be present for something because I need a
mhm,
break, because I'm just
mhm,
overwhelmed.
mhm.
And knowing that I'm going to come back to that, because if I don't come back to it, it's going to be brought to me when I least expect it, you know?
So true.
And that's how it works. It's like, okay, you ready? And if you're in tune enough, if you're aligned enough with the energies around you, you're gonna know when it's on its way. And
Uh-huh.
so, ready or not, here it comes. Yeah.
So true.
So yeah. And that even like talks about the relationship we have with these plants too,
Yeah,
like how we utilize them as
yeah,
well. So
yeah,
it kind of goes back to, again, the intention of like how we're working with these tools that we
yeah,
have.
yeah, yeah. I'll just say like one more thing of, you know, we were talking before about how people like they keep going back to ceremony, they keep going back to ceremony, they keep going back.
Yeah.
And it's like they're not giving themselves this like time to integrate, which is really the work. I mean, one of my teachers, he
Yeah.
always says at the end of like, sitting together, it's like now the work begins because
Yes.
that's real. Like now
Yeah.
you're gonna take all this stuff that's like whatever just happened to you and
Yeah.
bring it into the life that you're
Yeah.
living.
That's the catalyst.
And that,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's like this doesn't matter if you can't bring it into this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excuse me. And one thing I was going to say about that is, um, oh, the there are people who, um, how do I say this? Like how there's the ikaros, the songs that are
Yes.
sung in ceremony that have been given to
Yeah.
the human avatars from the plants, and
Correct.
those ikaros have like frequency that
Yes.
are just as medicinal as the plant
Oh, the
themselves.
voice is very powerful for
Oh
sure.
yeah. Yeah. And like I know of people who are they hold ceremony where they're just singing the ikaros and doing the healing, the extractions, and like all those different things. And I feel like, I mean, I know we're short of time, so I want to like end the conversation here. But I know that is something that I mean, I feel like you and I could like continue talking like more and more and
Oh,
more
we
about all
will.
these things. We should probably do something on Clubhouse around that.
Oh, that'd
Just
be fun. I'm open to it.
I
Yeah.
feel like that would be
Yeah.
really fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to bring to like that awareness if people don't know about that, that there is other ways to have relationships with these plants beyond um like having to ingest them in ceremony.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And I think that's a whole discussion as well, as like, what are those tools?
Hmm.
Let's introduce that. I mean, right off the bat, breath work is a really great
Huge.
alternative. I
Yeah.
love that. I've had some, you know, equally powerful
Yeah.
experiences I have with grandmother,
Yeah.
and I think it's important to not, the comparison of things can really, it's not, it doesn't do it justice to
Yeah.
say like it's this or that.
Yeah.
As creatures of wanting to really have the ability to say, is it going to provide the same experience, or is it going to allow for me to have the same benefits?
Right.
I would say it does.
Yeah.
It gives you a benefit, and
Yeah.
we're not going to measure like that benefit, but all we're going to say is it's another tool.
Yeah.
And it's a really great tool to have as well.
Yeah.
We have the breath. It's the source of life oftentimes, and so
Yeah.
we want to look at how can we utilize the thing that's been given to us, the thing
Yeah.
that we do have, and it operates within us.
Yeah.
And so that's one of many for sure.
Yeah.
And maybe even talking more at another time about the other tools as well, and how to utilize them. And community in itself can be very healing if you have the right mix of individuals that can support.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's something to definitely open up and discuss future.
Yeah. So stay tuned, y'all. We're gonna continue this conversation some other place. But yeah, so before we end this conversation for today, I would love if you can share what you are creating in your life right now.
Ooh, yes. So I'm creating a lot right now. It's it's a pandemic really kind of like came behind me and just like pushed a button that says activate. I'm creating a tarot course. So I work a lot with symbols and images and imagery. A lot of my work is helping people activate their intuition, and I use the tarot a lot. And so I'm creating an online curriculum at the moment. I'm also about to start working with psychedelics in a more clinical form. I'm going back to LA. So I'm between Sedona and LA right now, sometimes Joshua Tree. So a lot of the sacred locations, but I'm going back to LA. That's where the assignment is. I'm not sure from there. The universe tends to kind of fling me around the world. Right, just who knows after that. But I'll be working in a psychedelic clinic there with ketamine, and hopefully in the future other plant medicines as they become decriminalized and legalized. And I'm offering psychic readings and just still doing coaching and psychotherapy and just working with whatever comes my way. So, but my focus right now is really working with helping people reach a different level of awareness and integrating that back into the ordinary state of awareness.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's so important too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for the folks who are tuning in, how can they connect with you and find you?
Sure. My website is xavierbúo.com, XAIVERBUO.com. I'm on a few socials. I actually have a weekly group on Mondays on Clubhouse. So if people are on Clubhouse, I host with a magical being, Christina Ensminger. We host Mystic Mondays at noon Pacific Standard Time. Just conversations of all things magical. Sometimes they go into psychedelics, but it's pretty much, what people go into when they go into psychedelics, which is wanting to really connect with their magic, really wanting to connect with the divine, and also talking about other things that are not divine, and, working with mental health and spiritual health. So that's how you can reach me.
For me, all of that's divine. It's like all of it is in the sacred and divine. We've just
right. Yes, it's true. It's like the lack of light is just light returning back to light. Yeah,
exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for connecting today. I really appreciated it and had so much fun being in this conversation. And yes, we are going to continue this conversation in some form, and we'll let you know, those who are watching. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're still
thank you for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a pleasure and a joy. So thank you so much. And until the next time, I hope this conversation, for those who are still tuning in, hope it was supportive for you. And you'll see at the bottom of the video ways that you can connect with Xavier. And thank you so much. And many blessings to you on your journey.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Cosmic Earth Conversations. I hope it was supportive for you, and please take a moment to like and subscribe to this video and to this channel so you can be informed of the next time an episode drops. Many blessings to you on your journey.